Well, good evening, everybody. We're going to talk about something a little different now. We're going to talk about money. And I know that gets everybody's attention, and we're going to play a little game because funding is a game in education because there's winners and losers, and there's a lot of rules. So let's get started. So the first thing you need to know about school funding is the foundation funding. That's Arkansas school funding, that is. So in 22 there was $7,182 per student, and you can see that raised to $74.13 in 23. And this year each school receives $7,618 for each student of enrollment from their previous year's third quarter ADM, average daily membership. So you can see there's been an increase in your funding, which is always a good thing when you get more money. There's some other subcategories called categorical funding, real imaginative with the names. And so the English language learners, there's a dollar amount from $359, $366, and that has stayed kind of stable, and it's $366 again this year. AL alternative learning environment has went up just barely to $97 per student. And then the ESSA, those are three categories. So you don't qualify for all the money, all three categories within that categorical money, ESA, Enhanced Student Achievement. It depends on your poverty rates. So your free and reduced lunch qualifications, your percentage free and reduced lunch. The higher percentage that you have, the more money you get per student. So if you are on the lowest percentage of less than 70%, this year you're going to get $538 per student, an additional $538 to your $76.18 at the top. If you are 70 to 90%, then you're going to get $1,076 per student, and if you're above 90%, you're going to get $1,613 per student. So this is an example of what's called a state aid notice. Every school will receive one of these, and it breaks down what each fund that you receive, and also for budgeting, and I've worked with a lot of schools on their budgeting, it gives you the revenue code in the bottom right hand corner for that. So I always point that out and talk about that. Not that you need to learn revenue codes and expenditure codes and budget units, but if you're reading one of these, looking at how much money your school is going to receive from the state to operate, you need to know a couple of things about it. So that line 28, which is in the bottom section, but it's the top line, and you can see the numbers on the far left. There's $3.4 million received by this school, and this is just a sample school out there. So they received $3.4 million in foundation funds at a rate of $76.18 per student. Look to the right, there's a revenue code on the far right if you just kind of follow the line with your finger. But if you go down to, I believe it's line 33, and I can have difficulty seeing from here. No, it's 30, line 30, so I'm sorry. Education Excellence Trust Funds. So it looks like this school is going to receive an extra $735,000. That is not the case, because if you keep going to the right, you'll see that there is no revenue code for that line item. And that means that $735,000 is isolated to tell you what you're getting, or it's kind of labeled, but it is a part of that $3.4 million above. So that can be confusing or misleading. So if you run across your district state aid notice and you think, hey, we're going to get 3.4 plus $735,000, just know that that is why. So we don't want to be misled. Here's another slide on just a little deeper dive on your foundation and your categorical per each section. And this is another one for revenue type that kind of goes into a little more deeper dive as well. There is a hyperlink there for linked categorical rules if you want to kind of understand those more, as a bit.ly link that you could research if you're that interested. This last one, or this section, this table that we're at, was about the local tax and the URT. So let's explain a URT. That stands for Universal Rate of Tax. Universal Rate of Tax is the first 25 meals. You can see that URT equals 25 meals. So for a short description of what how school funding is, which it's pretty complex as you get deeper dive into it, the first 25 meals, whatever revenue that generates, tax revenue that generates at each school, at each community, that all goes into one big state pot. And so then whatever that total is divided by the previous year's third quarter ADM of each school, and then distributed, and that's where you get the $7,618 per student. So any meals above URT stay at home, stay local, they stay in your district. So that is unrestricted funds. You can get your additional meals that you may have. You can do that in a couple different ways. So the second row that shows the local tax dedicated meals, that's for a specific project that you passed a millage to. Let's give an example. Let's say you're having to build a new middle school, and you've gotten some partnership money from the state. That's another funding source we'll talk a little bit about. But that usually pays a portion to kind of help you offset the cost, subsidize the cost of your build. However, you have to come up with the rest of it, and you may not have enough money on hand with your current tax assessment to build that. So you could pass a dedicated mill if you got your voters to approve it, and if you receive an extra, it's 2 mills and that generates an extra $3 million a year or $10 million, then you can use that $10 million for that project. But it has to be that project. You can't pass a millage. Voters pass the millage expecting a new middle school, and then you change the game after you receive the money, after the millage is passed, and say, well, we want to build a new football stadium or something. You can't do that. You have to use the money for whatever specified purpose. The last one on the row is a local tax, so that's your debt service mills for bonded debt. Sometimes you need a little extra money just to pay the bills, make ends meet, just not so specified. And your debt service mills can be used for that. So it's a little less restrictive than the dedicated mills. So let's switch over to federal funds. So this is an example of ESSER funds. That's been a hot topic for several years, and this was some relief funds due to the COVID pandemic that came out. And so ESSER 1, ESSER 2, ESSER 2 supplemental, and ARP. So ARP is also known as ESSER 3. So real creative with the names that we have. But the ESSER 1 has already been spent. It's actually timelined out, meaning that it had to be spent already. It could not be used again. ESSER 2 this snapshot was taken about a month ago, and there was about $300,000 left in ESSER 2 statewide. So this chart is a filter of every school in the state, that they have to, all those schools that had a remaining amount of money in ESSER 2 will need to obligate and expend those funds by the end of this month. So just a few days to finish that out. ESSER 2 supplemental was very specific, so not a lot of people received that. But ARP was the big one, and it does not expire until September of 2024. And so that you still have a lot more money statewide to use, and you at your own district probably also have a good deal of money left. But you can spend that for another year. You have another year to expend that. And we're going to talk a little further about some of the things you could spend it on that will help kill two birds with one stone, with some compliance requirements with the LEARNS Act, which a big one is tutoring, or after-school programs that have to do with tutoring. That's a slam dunk. That also helps you meet your 20% requirement that goes along with ARP funds that must be spent on learning loss. So here's some of the acts that relate to funding that came out, and as you're looking through the presentation, I hope you've noticed that there is a little different design for an act versus a section of LEARNS, because LEARNS itself was just one act. It was just like Act 238 as far as its structure, but it was very large and had over 70 sections, and we broke that down for you a little more and applied it to each category of this presentation. So the LEARNS Act sections will have little shapes in the top right hand corner, and the acts will be the big square on the left. So this one is for enhanced transportation. Not every school gets enhanced transportation, but each year the state comes out with a list. There were some modifications to the amounts. If you received that list came out about a month ago, or maybe earlier, and it's been available, and it tells you exactly how much money you will receive for that. Act 572 just shows the total amount of the allocations or appropriations for the Department of Education. I want you to look at that number on the first bullet. That is $3.4 billion. And so I like to point that out because ain't no business like school business, and it's a big business. And at $3.4 billion, there's a lot of funding going towards education. Some of the heavy hitters are listed below in the bullets that you'll see, and we've talked about most of them already. This is another appropriation of $25 million to the grant program for after-school and summer programs, even infrastructure, quality, accountability systems for this upcoming year, or this current year. So that's another initiative of the LEARNS Act. A lot of these after-school programs or tutoring programs. So anytime someone gives you money, they're going to attach rules. And I mentioned that at the start that we're going to play a game, and this game has rules. So it even goes back biblical. If you ever remember the parable about the landowner, and he gives the servants different talents, or a different number of talents. So it's been going on forever. Your parents probably attached rules to the first money they gave you if they sent you to the store or whatever. So school business is no different in that regard. It's a lot of rules, and so we want you to be aware of those and aware of the funding that you're receiving. So this was just the act that actually increased the foundation funding amount, which we talked about earlier. This is an appropriation to the Department of Education for facilities and transportation. So I mentioned partnership money earlier when I gave the example about needing to do some dedicated meals, possibly for a partnership program. You don't have to, but if you have to pay your part, so if you do not have the money on hand, then you might need to do that in order to qualify for the partnership funds. Now, notice this is a section of the LEARNS Act, and this is the Arkansas Children's Educational Freedom Account Fund, aka vouchers, and this is a total appropriation of $52.1 million, which is a lot of money. So that's something to be aware of. I believe this one, that I wanted to make a point about this one, that equates to about 6,800 students if you divide that by 76 to 18, and about 5,000 of those vouchers have already been tapped into, so there's about 1,800 of those left available. The Arkansas Teacher Academy Scholarship Program. I like to put this one out there because we are dealing with a teacher shortage. So I like to just jump to this one and get to the meat and potatoes of what this is and what's available. So we're trying to get more teachers into the education field. The LEARNS Act did a lot of things. You increased the pay, which we're going to talk about in just a second. There's a lot of different things we need to do in order to get people into the field in the amount of time that we need before we have a really major problem. So you have to get them started early, and this is a way to get them started early. So it's an appropriation that pays post-secondary institutions, so college and universities, to develop a program, a scholarship program for students that are in the education pathway. And so it removes barriers, so those that want to go into the field they get their school paid for. They do not have those bills. And the money all transpires through the Department of Education and these post-secondary institutions. The one thing I liked is the second to last bullet. And I remember when I went to college and I got a scholarship to the quote-unquote free ride. Well, there are no free rides. And it was my tuition. It paid 100% of my tuition. So I thought, hey, this is great. I'm going to go to school, get my education for free. Then I got to the checkout window, and that was when there were still checkout windows. And they said I owed $1,200. I was like, wait a minute. How I got duped. I was expecting to kind of just get a receipt that's saying I'm fully paid, and they told me I owed more money. This program does not do that. That's one thing I wanted to point out. I really like. Even if there's infrastructure fees or other fees that university normally charges to a student, if that student is a participant of this program in good standing, those fees will not be passed on to that student. So they will not have any unexpected extra fees. If they do have those fees, they'll just waive them, or the institution will just waive them, eat the cost, as some say, and move on, because we want to make sure those those participants stay in the program, complete the program, and end up in your school in the classroom. So the last bullet is they even have the option at these post-secondary institutions to reach down into the high school level and bring that program to the high school so they can start them even earlier and kind of get some concurrent credit and some different programs to make them prep them earlier for the teaching profession. Literacy tutoring grant, the Right to Read Act. There's not a lot I can tell you about that right now. As far as the fund, this is an appropriation, but in our next section, we'll have more about literacy and the Right to Read Act, and I mentioned tutoring, so there's a big emphasis on using your funding towards those efforts. Teacher Minimum Salary and Raise Fund. This is a big one, $182.7 million. That equates to the $50,000 per teacher, the starting teacher pay. Big issue, good thing, positive thing, but there are winners and losers, as we mentioned earlier. Not because, I think anybody was trying to set out to create any losers, but that's just how it is. So you got all this money, you're just creating something new, and there is new rules. So at $182.7 million, that was what, based on a snapshot in time of what your staffing was for your classroom teachers, that was the amount of money that you received this year. Each school received, it's already received their money, that they need to make them whole for that $50,000 minimum. And if you had fewer teachers before than you do now, if you're growing, well, you did not receive money this year for those additional teachers. And right now there is no details in the law to say that that's going to increase, but hopefully it will. But right now it'll be that amount of money again next year, very similar to the teacher equalization funds that you also receive. And both of these are at the bottom, the last two items listed on that state aid notice that I talked about earlier. So Merit Teacher Incentive Fund, I'll let Ken talk more about this, but there was a $10 million appropriation. Sounds like a lot of money, and it is, but if you think about it, that may not go very far. It depends on who is all eligible and receiving that funding. So next up is Ken Rich. He's going to talk to you about how to spend the money and some of the rules that I mentioned earlier. Thank you.